Well, without further ado, Peter, do you want to introduce yourself and then I'll get the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'm Peter Haas. I'm with the Center for Neighborhood Technology. I'm the Chief Research Scientist, kind of a highfalutin title, but that's basically we do a lot of I do a lot of data science and on all kinds of issues. And I'll talk a little bit more about our role and our division. We call ourselves the Urban Analytic Division of the Center for Neighborhood Technology. I've been at CNT for longer than I can calculate right now, but it was 95 that I started. And I did do a fellow at Curl back in around 2001, 2002, looking at affordable housing in Uptown when Phil Nyden was director and David was assistant then. But so it's good to be back and to talk today about some of the work that we do at CNT with stormwater. Okay, so as I said, Peter Haas from the Center for Neighborhood Technology. I'm going to talk about our approach to urban flooding, stormwater mitigation in neighborhoods, Chicago and elsewhere. So I thought today I would talk a little bit about who CNT is and my division within CNT. Define what urban flooding is. It's not what everybody always thinks it is. So I'll go over that a little bit. Then I want to talk about some natural systems that can help prevent stormwater flooding and urban flooding in neighborhoods. Green stormwater infrastructure. We always used to call it green infrastructure. We put the stormwater in there because, solar panels are green infrastructure, but they're not having to do much with stormwater unless you're running a pump pipe or something. And then talk a little bit about some of our previous work, talk about our Rain Ready program, and some reports, show you some calculators, and then talk about a new product that we just put out, and then just one slide on what we're doing now. And I put these three images up here because it's sort of is the scope of our work. We write reports. We talk about this report about flooding in Chicago. We build tools. This is the green stormwater calculator. And then we also have been out in the field helping people actually build some of this green stormwater infrastructure. So CNT, we've been around since the 70s. 78, I think, is our founding title, or founding year. We work where urban form, the built environment, and infrastructure intersect. And recently, we've really sort of bent that whole view into looking at equity and sustainability and how that fits into making sustainable communities. We used to say we were the think and do tank for urban sustainability, but now we've changed our mission slightly to emphasize the fact that we're help create neighborhoods that are equitable, sustainable, and resilient. So so that's CNT. We were in Wicker Park. Well, originally we were down on Randolph in the West Loop. Moved to Wicker Park in the 80s before I was around. Then in 2018, we moved downtown. We sold our building. It was too expensive to keep a building in Wicker Park. It was too valuable. So as our endowment, we now rent on State Street. So if you're ever downtown, come to 17 North State Street on the 14th floor, pay us a visit. Not a lot of people working in the office these days. We are optional, and so I'm in there 2 days a week, and I think a lot of other people are on sort of that schedule. So my divisions, we call ourselves the Urban Analytic role. We work across all the sectors at CNT. So we have a transportation department. We have what we call the Urban Resilience Program, which used to be called Water, used to be called Research and Development, and then we still do transportation, urban resilience. We look at climate, and by the way, we're hiring a new CEO right now. So go to our website, and if you want to be a CEO for a not-for-profit, you can apply. Anyways, so the Urban Analytics Group works across all these sectors. We build, as I said before, we build advocacy tools. So our probably most famous tool that we've built is something called the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index, where we looked at the cost of housing plus the cost of transportation, the number 1 and 2 costs for households in America and how that relates to place. And so, you can buy a cheap house out in the suburbs, but then you spend all your money driving. And so what's that worth it? So that's been out since the mid aughts. And it's probably our number one site on the internet. We just updated it last year. So looking at the pandemic and how people didn't drive in 2020 was really an interesting. So our update, actually, we went back to 2019 to updates. We're going to see how things stabilize for our next update. Anyway, so we look across disciplines, much like the group that's here. So I have a PhD in physics from the Ohio State University. We have a computer scientist. We have an art historian who helps to help design our websites and user experience. We have an architect. Several of the people also have masters in urban planning, and we just hired a person with a public health background, Emily LaFlame, who started last fall. It's been an interesting addition to our analytic abilities. So why don't we jump into the topic of today? What is urban flooding? So urban flooding is not rivers overflowing and flooding farmland. Of course, the urban part is in there. But what it is when it occurs when rain or storms overwhelm the drainage system in urban areas, and also suburban areas. It could be in small towns, but it's not caused by what you call riverine flooding. It's caused by the lack of infrastructure to get the water out of where people live. So it happens where can happen anywhere, as I say here, and it's not. Usually, there's not a single identifiable source. So maybe the sewer doesn't have the capacity it needs, and also you've paved everything, so all the water needs to flow. Maybe when that sewer was built, this was all green grass and gardens and things where it could absorb more water. So I have some images here of what it looks like when it happens. So it can often happen in sort of low-lying depressed areas. You see this this is actually from Chicago. These are all from Chicago. And different times. This is Palmer Square, where you see that this is a good example of the sewer system just getting overwhelmed by and then up in Albany Park a couple of years ago when we had that huge deluge there by the river. So there again, the sewer system can't handle it. We want to keep the water where it falls and to soak in, but if we can't do that because we paved everything, then there's interventions that we can do. So I'd like to think about that a little bit. Yeah, so so one of the solutions that we've focused in on is how do we get natural systems back into neighborhoods and allow them to help mitigate some of the stormwater issues that we have, and we call that lovingly green stormwater infrastructure, or green infrastructure, or BMP's best management practices, low impact development, green. So there's lots of different names, but basically what it means is you're putting, it's an approach where you're using nature-based techniques to infiltrate mostly evapotranspiration to trees and other things to manage the stormwater. And I ran across someone who said this recently, professor up at Northwestern, engineering professor, who said it slows it down, it spreads it out, and it soaks it in. And that's what we're trying to do with the green infrastructure. So can we solve a 100-year storm in a low-lying area with just green infrastructure? Probably not. So it's one of these things where you got to look at an array of green infrastructure solutions with some gray infrastructure solutions to help solve some of the problems. But the more pedestrian storms, like, my basement used to flood. I've put in rain barrels and some gardens and things like that, and we don't flood anymore. So I don't know. But the other thing is it's like terrorism, right? If you don't have a terrorist attack, is it because what you did, or is it because there was no terrorist attack? Same thing here. Did I get some flooding, or was it? Maybe that was a bad example, but given that I was here, the fellow in 2001, you can understand where that came from. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So did you see that transition? Someone give us a thumbs up. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to review some of the different techniques that people do. This is a image from a group in Florida we were working with that was implementing green stormwater infrastructure in new construction as a part of getting your permit. But this is a good example of showing a lot of the different techniques. So you can do water capture, think rain barrel, think cistern, water redirection, detach your downspout and direct it into a garden. You can do just some smart landscaping, directing runoff, especially in large paved areas. I'm going to show pictures of this. Obviously, permeable paving, breaking up that concrete so that water can flow through and soak in. And then there's some large sites that I'll talk about. So water capture. So the big one and a sort of a popular one, and the former Mayor Daley used to love green roofs. And green roofs are really a good way to absorb water in places where there's no other options, right? So think downtown Chicago, think any downtown sort of dense area where there is no lawn or any green space to work with. Green roofs are a good application. Problem is green roofs are kind of expensive. And so it's maybe not the best solution in a neighborhood. Put a green roof on my garage, that would cost too much. Probably wouldn't be worth it. So there's that kind of thinking that you have to do when you're thinking about how to implement this. And a more affordable thing is a rain barrel. You get a 55-gallon drum somewhere, an old pickle barrel or something like that, and hook it up, put your downspout, and then use it to water your garden. Or I put mine directly into a soaker hose and just waters my garden continuously. Cisterns is just basically a giant rain barrel, 250 gallons-ish type thing. This is probably a 1,000-gallon cistern over at the Center for Green Technology over on Sacramento and Franklin, yeah, right, near Westinghouse. Or then there's a dry well. And so a dry well is you dig a hole, you put a piece of, it's basically a rain barrel underground with holes in it so that the water then leaches. In a storm, it can collect the water and the water then can then be absorbed into the aquifer. Water redirection. So this is the classic thing, and this is probably the most popular thing everybody does is build a rain garden. Often this isn't a great picture because you can't see where a detached downspout will route water into here. You have a ponding area, plus you have plants that are good at surviving wet and dry, and build with with soil and maybe even an underlayer of aggregate. Think gravel or something like that to hold water when it comes down in torrents. Planter boxes, same idea, sort of on a smaller scale. You can see here the downspout has been, this is in Philadelphia, downspout's been, this is by the way in Chicago suburbs at a church that we helped build. Planter box, routing some water into there, or a popular thing in more suburban areas is to do this foundation drain where you bury a pipe that absorbs the water and routes it to maybe a rain garden or to some other some area. So it gets the water away from the foundation of the house. Then landscaping, of course, trees hold water themselves in the canopy, but building a rain pit or a tree pit in a paved area is another way to route water back into the soil. Amending soil, just a lot of soil, especially in Chicago and the suburbs, have been is what you call urban disturbed soil. So it has a lot of clay, it's packed, it doesn't really absorb water. So amending your soil, putting some mulch putting mulch back into the soil so that it has more absorbing capacity. A bioswale is often a good idea to, so here's one that runs between a street and a sidewalk where you build a ponding area. Again, you populate it with plants that can absorb, can stand both dry and wet. Usually indigenous plants are good. At CNT, when we built our rain garden, which I'll talk a little bit about, we built a swale, went along the roof. As we were building it, it rained. a lot. We all got really soaking wet. The water went into it and it went away. It was just amazing just to see it happen. So these swales are really, these bioswales are a really effective way to control water. Urban farming and gardening, again, a way to get water that back into the soil. Raised beds, another, when you don't have the space to do farms or problematic soil, a raised bed is a way to do some gardening. Vegetative strip, maybe it's not as fancy as the swale, same idea. And then just some native vegetation, either keeping it, like in that Florida case, that was one of the things they were advocating, is developers quit coming in, clearing everything off, then building the house and then re-landscaping, but to build it in the natural, whatever the native landscaping is. Directing runoff. So here, parking lot swales. So you see this now and again nowadays. You see where people take a parking lot and they'll build a natural area in the middle of it and lean the parking lot so that the water will flow into there and be absorbed rather than just puddle. This is in a church up in the north side, which this whole parking lot would flood whenever it rained. Almost didn't even matter how much it rained, it would flood. And so this was their solution. And I think this is the one where the bishop came and blessed the whole thing. So being at a Jesuit school, I thought I should bring that. And then another picture of the roadside swale. So, but a little bigger and moving it into a place where there is a lot of pavement and breaking that up and allowing for that to happen. Then there's permeable pavement, and it's the same idea, just at different places. So you can do a patio with this sort of laying where you actually have grass growing between the bricks. Permeable parking. Here's a good picture of water being absorbed into that parking. Sidewalks, driveways, and of course streets. The old brick streets made more sense than putting asphalt down to absorb. And Oak Park, in fact, has unpaved and repaved with brick in a selected number of streets, which allows for less flooding. Oak Park's been a leader in a lot of this stuff. Anyway, and then there's these large sites, which are not exactly for the pedestrian user, but is interesting when you're looking at a neighborhood or a bigger scale. So a naturalized detention basin, and again, the center over on Sacramento has a nice naturalized detention basin. I couldn't find a good picture of it. I wanted to show that one, but here's a picture of this is out in Arlington Heights somewhere. But it's sort of a development. They put this in. You build natural. You build a sloping side that goes down to where there's water permanently, and then have aquatic plants growing along the side, so it can absorb torrential rains and also provide a natural system. And then there's even a bigger thing people do is this idea of a constructed wetland. And this is actually so it's a matter of scale. It's the same idea as this, only it's much bigger. You can see in this one, this is in Virginia somewhere. I couldn't find an Illinois example, but where they've actually got these culverts coming in from this housing development, flooding this. And the other nice part about these constructed wetlands is they clean the water as well. So a lot of pollution. Some people call it nutrient farming, especially in a more agricultural setting. You route a lot of the water that comes off of farm fields where they over fertilized, which is what we do when we have commercial or industrial farming like we do in Illinois. And all of that goes into the Mississippi River, goes down in the Gulf, causes the dead zone to happen. So Hay and Associates and others have built these things called nutrient farms, where the water flows into these constructed wetlands. The nutrients get absorbed by the plants in there, cause a healthy ecosystem, and then the water that leaves the wetland is no longer inundated with all that fertilizer. Anyway, so those are some examples of natural systems that can keep spread the water, slow the water, and soak the water in to the local environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our history, what we've been doing. So around 2001, we really started exploring how we could implement green infrastructure in neighborhoods that were having flooding. We as I talked about, when we rehabbed our building on North Avenue to a LEED Platinum building, the second LEED Platinum. The Center for Green Technology beat us by about a month. We were the second platinum rehab in the country. And Chicago has the berry for the first. Anyway, so we built our own, we actually walked the walk. We took our parking lot, dug it up, put in a gravel parking lot with so water could soak in. Bill Eyring, I just want to raise his name because he was really he's a former staff. He's retired now. He lives up in Skokie. He still as a hobby maintains people's rain gardens all around the region. He does the one by Ryan Field up at Northwestern. The professor at Northwestern I talked about has met Bill on occasion when looking at this. I just wanted to show an example of, so at the school, at Lucy Flowers school over by the Garfield Park Conservatory, wanted to build a rain garden. They have this, they have a school within a school called the Al Raby School of Planning. And so here's a picture of before we got involved, and we dug. So there's lots of intermediate pictures, and I guess I'm going to leave this PowerPoint, and people can go to these sites and learn more about all this. We dug all that up, and we had the students from the school work with the landscapers to put in a well-designed rain garden to absorb some of the water in that thing. And the nice part about it is Wangari Maathai, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, came to Chicago and dedicated the garden. There she is. I think she died right in like 2012 or 15 or something like that. Were you at the Department of Environment when that happened? When she came?
Yeah.
I think
Green Corps went over and helped.
Yeah. Maybe that's who's here. Anyway, so out of that, and working with the Department of Environment back in the day, CNT developed what we call our green values calculator, which is I'll go through the most recent version of that. But the idea is why do we, when we require people to build stuff, we require to build vaults underground to absorb all this water, when we could be putting green infrastructure in its place for a better cost benefit analysis. And then we keep going, and I'll talk about what we're working on nowadays. One of the big programs that we've now, we started back in around 2010 or 2012 was called Rain Ready. And the idea was we worked with local communities, mostly in the south suburbs, to put together advisory group. This is a group from Midlothian. These are just citizens in Midlothian who are tired of getting flooded. And they formed an advisory committee. We looked at the situation. We got the Metropolitan MWRD, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, to invest some money and fix the problem and build what's called a green, I forget what they call it, but it's a park that was flooding is now can absorb the water. Plus, this is where I talk about the gray and green meeting each other. There was a culvert that was way undersized. It was causing the whole thing. When they changed the culvert and put in some green infrastructure, now it doesn't flood in this area in Midlothian anymore. So it's sort of a combination of getting the advocates, getting the local people. That's what the Rain Ready, getting ready for your rain. And there were several components to this. So one was Rain Ready Home. And that's where we would go out to people's house and we would take a look around. People would call us, and we had an open line and we had a website, and we had an engineer who would then go out to your house and take a look and say, you know what, if you did this, this, and this, and both green and gray solutions, things like sump pumps were maybe applicable to something. Here's a rain garden that would be put in Oak Park. You can see here's the downspout that got rerouted into this little place. And both Oak Park and Wilmette partnered with us. They subsidized homeowners to put in green infrastructure. We helped them design that and found contractors to help them put them in. Since then, we've transferred this to Elevate. It used to be called Elevate Energy over in West Loop. They're a spinoff of CNT. The CNT Energy Group got so big around 2010 again, maybe a little earlier, 2008. They broke off and formed their own not-for-profit called Elevate Energy. And since they were more adept at going into people's houses, doing energy audits and stuff. Now they do some water audits. And I would suggest, if you're interested in this, take a look at Elevate's stormwater management program. Little pitch for our sister organization. Another tool that we built during this time was called My Rain Ready. And I'm not going to go through step by step on how this works, but the idea here was this was a website that we built. And then again, this is a good example of our urban analytics. Our division put this together with the Rain Ready team back in those days, before it was called water, before it was called urban resilience. And it's a tool that you put in your address and it asks you a bunch of questions. When was your house built? Are you sitting on the top of a hill? And it doesn't really ask that, but it asks a bunch of questions about what's your susceptibility to flooding? Do you actually get flooding? It does some suggestions. And if that doesn't work, give us a call and we'll hook you up with the Rain Ready Home program. So yeah, you could go through, answer these questions and print out a report that could be useful. Again, this is still live and useful. And so My Rain Ready, on all these pages, I have a link to, on many of the pages, I have a link to what we're doing. Towards the 2017 time frame, 2015 to 2017, we got a large grant from Cook County to look at 6 communities down in the south suburbs along the Calsag Canal, which connects the Calumet River to the Des Plaines. And these places flood a lot because they're flat, it's low lying, they're lower income communities, they're sort of places where we could join in and help these 6 communities look at their flooding problem, try to come up with a green infrastructure plan for each one of these communities. And we did. Took us 3 years to do it. Here's way too many numbers in small fonts, but we had over 2,100 community residents join in. We had a bunch of, we surveyed a lot. We had public meetings where we would get elected officials and community members together, talk about what was going on. We reached out, we tried to identify places, problematic areas in each one of these communities. We had a technical advisory committee of a bunch of engineers to check out the plans to make sure that made sense. We built a website, which was sort of an in-house website to sort of dig into some of the hydrology to more detail than you'd usually want to think about. And we had 24 community steering committees meetings. So from that, we created 6 different plans unique to each one of these locations. These are all on our website. I think I have, well, I put the link on a previous slide. So each one of these plans had some ideas of things you could do and next steps. So in each plan, here's the Calumet Park Advisory Committee. It was local residents got together and said, this is, it's flooding because the railroad tracks over there and the water can't flow. And we ran across things like that where the railroad tracks were actually in Blue Island. And so there's some interesting issues along that line. We did the survey. You can't really read this very well, but the idea was we found out what was going on within the community from the community members' perspective, which I think was sort of unique at the time. We came up with classifications of strategies. We can't see that, but I think everybody at home can. Well, anyway, but in 3 different categories, thinking about planning, thinking about implementation, and then we actually have real plans. And so we came up with actual ideas of what to do. Here is what's called the Robbins Open Space Park. This was a junkyard. What's the proper word for that these days? But that got removed, and MWRD actually picked this up, and they're building this park with this basin. So this goes back to some of those previous pictures of the naturalized detention basins and/or engineered wetland, and build a nice park where people can actually enjoy nature. Plus, it solves some of the need, and this is actually getting implemented. The problem with this whole endeavor was we came up with 6 plans and we came up with, we had all of this input from the community, we had all this stuff, but at the end, we had no money to implement any of it. So, and there was actually some anger from some of the people that at us and at Cook County for not coming across and actually coming up with some money. One of the questions that we kept getting was, where's their funding? How can you help us get funding? Doesn't the state have a thing? Doesn't the feds have some, or can we go to philanthropy? So we did our best. We couldn't come up with much of that. But, so this is the nice part, is now, because of our friends in the White House, and because of all the federal money that came because of the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, some of the COVID recovery act, there's $6 million that the county has allocated to put back into these 6 communities to, as I bolded here, fund, to plan, to build and establish a portfolio of projects. So we're actually in the process right now of putting this together, reaching out again, see if we can resurrect some of those community groups, go back to the plan and say, these are the ideas that we thought would work. Are they still appropriate? And then, and so our first community organized group is going to be happening in late April, early May, and we're going to see this through. So this is the nice part of the end of the story. I hope that that $6 million is enough. $6 million isn't all that much. We need to get some matching funds, which we are having some success in getting to. So that's going on right now. But I digress. I wanted to drop back and talk a little bit about how equitable flooding happens. And you think about infrastructure investments over the generations, and do we have enough sewage, storm sewer systems and everything else in this area? So we wanted to get a sense of where is it flooding and who lives where it's flooding. So we got data from FEMA on the flood insurance program. We got FEMA's disaster. There's 2 disasters in this time frame, 2027 to 20. You remember in 2013 it rained like 8 inches in 24 hours, and just there it was a natural disaster. FEMA came in. We helped allocate some of those funds and helped people put the area. We also got a limited set of private insurance claims from this period, from 7 to 16. And then we looked at those, and zip code, unfortunately, when anybody does geographical information systems, zip codes is like the least favorite way to look at anything, but it is the most feasible, right? Hillary Clinton says you shouldn't, how did she put it? Your economic stability shouldn't be determined by your zip code, right? So people think about zip codes when they think about these things. So we put it in zip codes, and you can see here where the most claims were in red. In the hash that's gray is where the largest percentage of people of color are, and where there is no hashing. You can see that where it's not, it's a pretty, you look at this map. I have to say, I've made so many maps of Chicago where we're looking at where there's investment, where there's disinvestment. I remember Phil and I going to the MacArthur Foundation and talking about some of this stuff and getting yelled at by them, saying, of course we invest. Anyway, I won't go there. But this happens. Every map I make looks the same. It doesn't matter what you're looking at. Transportation costs. And so here's a graph. We actually published this with your, I don't know if DePaul would be called a competitor.
Our friends down the way.
Our friends down the way. We published with, what's his name? Schwederman helped us get a publication where we took those data and we have it published. And this is sort of, so you're looking at the x-axis is the percentage within those zip codes of people of color, and now the number of claims, and you can see it's clearly highly correlated. So there is some equity issues, and that's something that we're spending a lot of time looking at currently. I'm going to shift gears and talk about some of the tools that we've built over the years. Well, one tool in particular called our Green Values Calculator, and this is like the 4th generation of this tool. We started back in 2008. With the city of Chicago, building them a tool to look at how that works. US EPA came to us, hey, that's pretty cool. Why don't you build us a national tool? We did that. Since then, they have revamped it and built it themselves, which is good. That's but we kept our tool, and 2020 we released a new version of it, which has been tweaked since. when we keep it updated. But the idea of this tool is you're a citizen living in a place that you get some flooding, you want to come up with an idea. How should I invest? You could also be a developer. Oh, I got a vacant lot. I want to build something. What should I, how should I deal with my stormwater infrastructure? So you come in here, you can either pick a pre-made sort of scenario. There's a bunch of these, have an urban farm, have apartments, commercial space. But if we pick an urban home, you can also just design your own. You're going to say, I have 250, that's not very big lot, but you have a 1,000 square foot lot, and you have so much lawn and so much paved, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through all of the, it's like the cooking show where they already have the onions cut. So I'm cutting the onions in. So you put in, so I've actually, this is sort of designed after my house. So I have a garage, actually it has, I wanted to have a flat roof to show how green roofs either can work or not. You need a flat roof for a green. Pitch sidewalk, sidewalks, I've got some flower beds, got a little lawn, some sidewalks. And now I want to add some green infrastructure. So I put in my 3 rain barrels. And I put in a rain garden. I put in 100 square foot, 10 by 10 foot rain garden in this. What that does is that adds enough volume to take in all the rain that would fall on the impermeable surfaces, which is in code in Chicago. You have to be able to absorb a ½ inch of rain that falls on your roof, sidewalk, and garage, or whatever you have paved. When you build a new, of course, there's no legacy to this, but when you build a new one, so it meets that goal. It more than meets that goal. My little rain barrels and rain garden. But the more interesting, well, how do I go back? I go previous. Okay. Well, so we have different things that we can summarize. What's the benefit of this? And one of them is just runoff. So if you think about, so it's going to rain, and water's going to run off, right? Before I did anything, the runoff in a year, and I'll talk about what rain's a little complicated. I'll talk about that in a second. You can't just say it rains 35 inches on average in Chicago and that all falls at one time and what runs off. You can't, obviously you can't do that. Think of your landscape as a sponge. When it rains a little, it soaks in. When it rains a little more, some of it flows off, most of it soaks in. When you have a storm, a lot of it runs off. So we both look at what annual, we predict the rainfall, given historic rainfalls over a year, and say, well, by doing these 2 little interventions, I've reduced my runoff that goes into the sewer in front of my house by 13%. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if everybody in Chicago did that, MWRD would probably be looking for water to treat after something. I'm kidding, but it would reduce. And then think about the rainstorm when you have 2 1/3 inches falling. If I didn't do anything, I'd have 1 inch of runoff, and you don't see as much benefit because I'm not in those times when you get the low rain. I just wanted to sort of say. So we went back and we looked at NOAA data, the weather people, the national weather, and we got weather predictions going back to World War II, not predictions, measurements, and we synthesize what the rainfall would look like given those data. We don't go back and actually use the old data. We synthesize it using a log normal distribution, which is more than we want to talk about maybe today. So this is what we say would rain in Chicago. There's my 2 1/3 inch rainfall. It's kind of out there. It's a 99th percentile storm. But the average rainfall on a rainy day in Chicago is something. Oh, I think this is actually not Chicago. This is the national average. So it's a 1/3 of an inch, on a rainy day. So, but you see a lot of days where it doesn't rain much at all. It rains less than 1/10 of an inch. So I have to take all of that, put it into my runoff calculations, given the green infrastructure, and see how that reduces. So that's how that works. The other panel that comes up is the benefits. You can see that again, a small intervention like what I did doesn't amount going to a lot of money in terms of groundwater treatment avoided, 52 cents a year saves on my property. But again, add that up, MWRD is treating a lot less water. One of the things that we did a lot of research, and I'll talk about this in a second, is how does implementation of green infrastructure change? Is there gentrification from this, right? I've made my neighborhood better because I put in rain barrels and rain gardens and I don't have as much flooding. Is that going to really now start making people not be able to afford to live in the neighborhood anymore? That's the question that we were posed by a foundation. And we did some research on that. I'll talk about the results of that. But you see, if just because I've built anything, you get something like a 2.8% increase. So it's not a lot, but it's not zero, right? And then one of the things is that there's a lot of benefits. I think I had that on that previous slide. Oh, I'm clicking too fast. Previous slide. You know, some benefits are easy to monetize. Some are hard to monetize, but they're benefits. I can breathe better because there's trees around, right? If you had a public health model that was gigantic and pervasive, you could probably calculate the value of that. And so I talked about the real estate, and then that can't be monetized as much. So we developed this this report a couple years ago. Anna Wolf, one of my colleagues, spent a lot of time getting this all pulled together. And it breaks down. So the green infrastructure that we list here is slightly different, but you know, it has rain gardens, street trees, a lot of the same. So we categorize things slightly different here. But 3 dots means it's going to help, right? So a linear park or maybe a rain garden is going to improve the outdoor air quality a little bit. Trees are always sort of a big advantage. Trees always show a lot of benefits. So we have health benefits. We have some economic benefits. Some of that we could actually monetize. Some we can't. The increased sales revenue, the property value, as I talked about. You know, how value is this for climate adaptation and resilience? So a lot of blue here. And then finally, transportation benefits. You saw those cars at Palmer Square in that one slide showing urban flooding. That's a problem when you go out to your cars, you know, above the tires in stormwater. So yeah, so there's lots of benefits that are hard to quantify, but we've made some attempt at least to show the value of that. Here's the report that we put together with SB Freeman for the looking at that foundation. They're going to kill me if I'll come up with it. Yeah, so the benefit of putting in different types of some pervious paving, looking at green roofs, looking at sort of a categorization of the swales and that kind of thing versus those bigger interventions. And you can see that on average for the homeowner property value, you know, it's 0.2% in that realm. So we have come to the conclusion that it's not a driver of gentrification. It's something, like I said before, it's not zero, but this isn't going to probably make or break, it depending how on the community. So we're looking more into, we're doing more work on this, and I'll point to that in a minute. So something that we just released, we call the Calumet Urban Flooding Baseline, and this is, you know, people want to know where it floods, why it floods, what's going on, who's getting flooded. And so we set out there's a working task force in this region called the Calumet Stormwater Task Force. And we talked about this and we decided that let's focus in on the south suburbs. Again, though, more than just those 6, but all of basically some of the southern community areas in Chicago on down to the border of Cook County, and look at what's going on there and how is the flooding. As I said, that's a very flat, previously industrial, well, it's still industrial, but Some of the steel mills used to dump slag, hot slag, so that's an impermeable surface that you can't get thing. So there's lots of that kind of things going on. We know it's a high population of people of color. It has low to moderate income areas, and it experienced flooding frequency. So we wanted to dive in to that area and build a tool that you could kind of examine this. And this tool is less analytic than a lot of our other tools. It's more of a storytelling kind of thing. And so in fact, we used what's called story maps to talk about that. Here's the region. Go to this site, which I'm sure I put here somewhere. And you can, oh, it's right. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, so it's this whole region. Here's that Cal-Sag Canal that connects the Little Calumet, the Grand Calumet to the Des Plaines River, and all of the community areas. There are some forest preserves in there, so there are some natural infrastructure in place. So when you get to the site, you can pick a neighborhood. I picked Roseland, and when you get there, you get this little screen that says, take a look, see what's going on. And as you scroll down, it starts to tell the story. Where is it flooding? Why is it flooding? And talks about some of the history and the sewer systems. Talks about flood risk, and actually links you to some of other national tools on flood risk. This is where the previous alum, Galina it's contributed highly to this, so I stuck her little shout out there. Yeah, so as you scroll down, you do get some more analytic stuff. So here's some of that the flood insurance data that I talked about, and you see in Roseland, it's not zero. There's some claims. Claims are kind of a funny thing because that doesn't really indicate flooding, because it's a combination of people who could afford flood insurance and people who got flooded enough to have claims. So although the FEMA, when you come in a natural disaster, then that's a better indicator of how much flooding there happens. But you can see Roseland has some challenges. And as you go, you get some here. Now you're breaking this out in charts rather than in just in maps. You can see that the disaster relief is where Roseland got its money, but so does Cook County, right? So there's the little blue thing is that little tiny line on top of there compared to the numbers that you see here. So another thing you can do is look at land cover. So we have land cover data coming from Cook County. It's vintage 2010, but things haven't changed that much. You can see that in Roseland, there's quite a bit of paved, but there's some opportunity to do more natural systems. So this all is impermeable. Can we move some of this paved back into that natural systems to help prevent flooding? Most of Roseland is residential, although there are some transportation assets, the L and some rail corridors go through here. One of the opportunities here, when you think about institutional places, are there schools and other governmental offices where there could be more open to implementing some of the green infrastructure solutions that we suggest. Yeah, and then you can also go and just look at the map. Here I've gone into another part of the site where you can then drill down and just do some pedestrian GIS kind of stuff and take a look at this. I'm looking at incomes, and you can see the income distribution within Roseland, well, the low income distribution. There is a little bit of hydrology in here too. So catchment is like a mini watershed. You think about when water falls, where does all the water in this little 30-acre area? And you can see I picked the catchment here. This is now in Palos Hills, but you can see all the water from all of these different catchments end up going through this catchment before it gets to the Cal-Sag, right? So there's some potential. If you're thinking, well, I'm flooding a lot, I should just do something in my neighborhood. You got to start thinking a little bit bigger when you start looking at pictures like this. So this is my last slide. So this is what we're doing now. I talked about that rain ready, Calumet rain ready, where we're actually looking at investing and building out those plans. We have what's we're calling the Civic Innovation Hub, where we're looking at bringing together some municipal leaders and how they can mitigate some flooding. We're working with the Southeast Environmental Task Force down in Southeast Side. Working with them sort of as they need technical assistance to look at flooding issues and other issues actually within the Southeast Side. Working with Lavejo, the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, again, but similar project. Working with them, looking at water issues in Little Village. This hasn't been released yet. We've looked at where the city invests in the sewer infrastructure and to see how equity, talk about a map that you've seen before. You take a look at that. But it's kind of interesting because there is some movement towards investing in places that I think were underinvested in the past. And we're seeing some investment in areas where there is. But we've got to get better data on that. And I have an intern coming in next week who's going to figure out how to parse some budgetary documents that we haven't included and all that stuff. So CMAP flood equity, we're looking where transportation meets flooding and trying to work with community-based organizations to see how we can how CMAP, Chicago Metropolitan Area for Planning, can interact with some of the transportation orgs in the area to look at that. The Leap High, that Leap High is an NSF program. I forget what it stands for, but that's NSF's name for it. But we're working with Northwestern, University of Pittsburgh, and our partners, Green Print partners, who implement green infrastructure around the area. We're putting together, so Pitt and Northwestern are developing a monitoring system where they're actually putting detectors in the ground at different green infrastructure implementations and non-green infrastructure implementations, seeing how much water gets absorbed, what's the water quality, how much salt, other pollutants are in the water. And then we're building a tool that will allow people to sort of like the green values calculator, but it's going to be much more visual. So you're going to see a map of the area. You're going to say, I'm going to build with your mouse, you're going to say, I'm going to build a rain garden over here, put a swale in over here, put some rain barrels on these buildings, and then see how the networking of green infrastructure actually helps better than just doing a one-off kind of thing. And then so FEMA has what they're calling, I forget what it is, 2.0, but anyway, they're changing the way the pricing of their premiums for flood insurance, depending on your zip code, literally, and lowering it for lower communities with lower income, and actually raising it in some communities where people can afford it. So we're going into that kicked in last year. I think the first repricing of that happened about a year ago, and so we're looking at data as it comes in to see how equitable that goes. So with that, I'm going to stop. I think I was a little over an hour, but
Very much.
yeah.
If you want to stop sharing the screen, then we can.
Yeah.
There's a
Boom.
question.
See everybody
in the chat. Yeah. So we'll open up. Thanks, Peter. And I should actually, while you all are gathering your questions and comments, I should say that this is actually co-sponsored. It's a regular Friday morning seminar, but with our colleagues from the Office of Sustainability. So as a part of their Water Week and a part of the whole year. So thanks for joining us on this, and thanks, Peter, for coming in.
Sure.
I'll throw it open. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and lob out a question or raise your hand, and we can look at that way or whatever.
I actually have a question.
Okay, good.
That's good.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
First of all, I think this is a great way to get residents involved with making improvements to their situation. I think that like giving them the tools that they need, I think flooding can be so debilitating. So I think this is a great way to really get them involved. In terms of the data that CNT has collected, what are some predictions that you guys are talking about in terms of how climate change increasing and speeding up will really affect urban flooding? And are there any like infrastructure conversations about like what this will look like and as it's
Yeah, that's a great question. So we all know climate change is happening and we know that it's raining more. One of the interesting things in the, I talked about that tool that we're building for the NSF project. We are getting, well, we're not the only ones, but so Illinois has something called the Illinois Water. I can't remember. Anyway, Illinois statewide and down in Champaign, then a bunch of scientists get together and they think about how it rains in Illinois and what sort of infrastructure requirements are happening. They've changed their prediction of how it's going to rain for the future, compensating for some of the climate models that are now in there. So we are planning on using that in both the graph that I show for our green values things, that's historic data. So that doesn't take into that. And what we want to do is we want to figure out how do we need to up that a little bit so that you're thinking about, well, I'm going to build a ring around, it's going to be around for 20 years. What's it going to be like in 20 years? How should I size it for that? I think that's the root of your question. So we're trying to bring that into the conversation. The Illinois Water Survey, that's what they call, has come up with this new estimate, which I think is pretty bold that they did that. Illinois is leading the way in some ways in some of this kind of stuff. So we'll put that into our thing. How are we implementing that on a day-to-day basis when we're talking to people? Well, we're just sort of doing what I'm doing right now, is saying it's going to happen. The extent of it is going to happen. We're starting to now figure out how to build it into our tools so that we can, so we take that into consideration. But it's a big question. I might just riff on this a little bit more. Two things I wanted to talk about. One is I didn't mention this and I should have, in that where we're looking at with the story map thing with the Calumet, where we're looking at the urban flooding baseline project, we gave people an app. We gave a handful of folks in 4 or 5 different municipalities down there an app that we developed for their camera. I don't have my phone, it's over there, to go out after a rain event and take pictures of what was going on. And you can, that's exposed on the site. So you can go in there and you can say, oh, in on June 6th, 2022, Nancy went out and took some pictures and here they are. And you can see these huge puddles and you can see the deteriorated concrete because this is a place that floods a lot. And that's only going to happen more, right? And so this is an advocacy tool, both for municipal engineers to get an idea of what's going on, but also for a community member to go to a community meeting or to their alderman's, whatever, depending on what the governance structure of the municipality is, go to a community meeting and say, look, here's some pictures. Look at this. This is what happens after it rains in my neighborhood. And so what's going to happen more? So that was one. The other thing I think is an opportunity. This is now going up at 10,000, 100,000 feet and thinking about nationally or even internationally, what's happening with climate change. In 20 years, are people going to be able to live in Miami or in all of these places where we are, that coastal flooding now becomes urban flooding and people are going to have to move. I think this is an opportunity for the Midwest, right? People like the mayor of Dayton, Ohio, has sort of made this a part of her agenda, is to look at, if you want to call it climate, there's a clever phrase, climate refugees, climate UGs, I don't know. But yeah, so to Akron, Ohio is another Midwest city that's done some interesting things on that. They've looked at immigration, looking at what's happening in South Asia, where some people are being displaced and promoted, to repopulate some of these Rust Belt cities that have gotten some depopulation, to build in, and the Twin Cities is famous for its Hmong population. Again, looking at ways to reinvigorate. We have the Great Lakes, we have the assets. We also are going to have a different kind of climate. So how does that all work out? It's an interesting thing to think about. I'm not sure. We're not really in the middle of all of that discussion, but I like to keep my radar out.
Well, I think that for residents, because for my project, we talked to a resident who took a lot of pictures and uploaded to the database.
Yeah.
And he felt like, every day he would go out and take a picture. And he started creating his own kind of trends that he noticed. And I think that's a way for residents to get involved with understanding and adapting to climate change in their own communities.
Uh-huh.
So I think that just gets them involved even more.
Questions, and lest I ignore you all, questions in the room or online? Comments? You know, one of the things I'm struck because I live 5 blocks due west of here in Rogers Park.
Mhm.
The interesting thing of all different kinds of climate conversations you can have with your neighbors, there's nothing like water and flooding to really bring the neighbors together, right? Like there's quickly, you know, we got so much rain last summer. Yes, last summer, that one particular, you know, cell that sort of stopped over Rogers Park and dropped a bunch of water. It really brought us out. Now we happen to live in a couple of blocks where we keep in touch with folks, but it was interesting to see how there's a moment in time in which you are able to have a conversation about climate, about weather, the impact on your property, on your neighborhood, that literally you're brought out of your homes to kind of figure out how to lower the water in the streets before it spills into your home, or how bad is the flooding, Peter, in your basement?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's just interesting of all the way, you know, if I talk about solar energy, that doesn't, I've got to go and have a conversation with somebody
Right.
about that.
Yeah, every so often,
Specifically, but this,
like probably that same time last summer, you know, we had probably not as much as you had up here, but in Logan Square, we had some. And my one neighbor that I don't know very well came down the block, right? Particularly in the drain in front of my house, which I was doing.
Right.
And then we had that conversation, right?
Yeah.
So it's nice to, it's a nice way, you know, dogs and babies and
Yeah.
flooding, I guess, are ways to meet your neighbors. And the solar energy thing's kind of funny because I have solar panels on my house,
Right.
and very, very seldom, it's a little thing. Someone will go, "What's going on there?
yeah,
How do I do that? Where can I get where can I get that?" But you're right. It's not like people come out because
the shared
flooded.
experience.
Yeah.
Other side. There's something about a silver lining in a rain cloud here, but I'll avoid that. Other questions or comments?
I have one for you, Peter. So I'm really interested in water quality around stormwater, and you talked a lot about water quantity today and kind of touched on water quality at the end. But I'm really curious in a place like Chicago that, you know, is still so reliant on combined sewers, and we know obviously the negative impacts of combined sewer overflows, but as we move our infrastructure to separate sewers and are putting more of the stormwater quality management into neighborhoods, how do we think about making sure that these, you know, retention swales and that kind of thing don't become contaminated sites within a neighborhood?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it begs a thing that I meant to bring up when I was talking about the green infrastructure in general, is this maintenance, right? Site maintenance. There's this issue of, well, okay, I mean, this is like everything in life, right? You put something in and then do you take care of it? When your kid gets a pet, will that rabbit get fed every day? Or am I going to do that? Which it ends up being. But yeah, so that's an issue. One of the things that we found when we were working with Northwestern and Pitt, and still are, that we have this inventory that we've collected over the years of different green infrastructure sites, and she sends out some of her students to sort of inspect them, and about half of them are icky, right? They don't work anymore. They haven't been taken care of. They might be polluted from salt. I mean, salt is a big thing when you're especially in these roadside swales and things like that. So how do you commit to maintaining these things? Is part of what we're trying to figure out right now. So I think your question is good. I haven't seen where it's become like, you know, there's so many toxins that come off of a parking lot that's a good example of a place where you will get a lot of toxins besides just salt. But you get oil and all of this other kind of crazy stuff. There's one of the sites that the University of Pittsburgh is monitoring. Of course, it's Pittsburgh monitoring in Gary, Indiana, but Gary had their municipal campus or whatever has a large parking lot with permeable pavement, but we're monitoring all the effluent that comes off of that and finding, different levels of pollution. So it's an open question right now. I think this goes back to the maintenance question and how do we commit when you build something that you're going to have this maintained. My old colleague, not that old, but the retired colleague, Bill Iring, goes out and does this because he's so interested in it. Might be a good question. Next time I see him, I might ask him, is he finding toxic, is this become a toxic reservoir? That's kind of what the direction.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the accumulation of contaminants, but also the deterioration of the performance. So you kind of pointed to that in terms of like naturalized detention basins or constructed wetlands that, they perform well out of the box. And so the neighborhood's very happy. And then as it deteriorates over time, the funding for that is dispersed. So like we have funding consistently for sewage treatment plants through water utilities, and that's paid for continuously. But you need to re-up funds for these neighborhood infrastructure projects to make sure that they function properly over time.
Yeah, those are good points. Don't have a solution for it right now. Good.
It somewhat depends on what type of vegetation is growing in those areas too. There's certain plants that are able to uptake different types of, toxins to humans, but not toxins to plants. So you can plant specific types of species to compensate for potential accumulations.
Yeah, that's one thing that the folks up in Pittsburgh are looking at is that whole what's your menu of plants that you should be planting in different opportunities. But so like engineered wetlands, there is a set of plants, and now those actually do take quite a bit of maintenance and dredging and all of that as the years go by to maintain their effectiveness. Those are good points.
Christine?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously this is all a policy question, but is that when it's a public property, that how do you build in maintenance over the long term rather than just the instance of construction? So, I'm just saying, which is more than true just for water treatment, it's true for a lot of things. And how do you build in that cost, so to speak, into the development of whatever the infrastructure is? But it also brings up the question of when it's private, what is sort of the private responsibility for maintenance? There is some, in my sidewalk. I have a certain responsibility to shovel, and I have a certain responsibility if something goes wrong, that I have to pay for 50%, blah, 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 of the new sidewalk. And it seems almost that there has to be things built in like that to build an infrastructure of maintenance in all of these ideas. The great thing about, I think it was Leah who was just bringing up the stuff about the plants, you're sort of built in a self-care infrastructure with the plants. So there's less likely a chance of doing that, but that also might mean that in any of these processes, there's more of a mandate to use those plants.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, yeah.
Well, a couple of things that would respond to that. One is that, and I said we have the $6 million plus more from Cook County to implement some of those plans we developed in 2017. And in that case, we are building in some maintenance to that. I'm not sure how that's all going to come out because we're just getting going with that. But I think that that's really important. So that's one side of the story. The bad part of the story is that whole, I almost hate to say this, Gari Matai garden over by Garfield Park Conservatory, go by now. And for one thing, so you're talking about public infrastructure, right? So that's a public place. Somebody decided that it was a good idea to put a fence around it. And it actually, part of it, as you notice the pictures, it had a walk through it. So you can't do that. There's a stone with her name on it. You can't even see anymore because they put the fence up. And then when the fence is there, they can't take care of it. And so now it's just some trees and sort of they mulch it, but all of the I mean, this goes back to Gordon's question, I think, is that all of the sort of plants that you saw those people planting, they're not there anymore. They didn't take care of them. Because, well, I mean, the school, CPS, right? They don't have any money to throw at this, but somehow, so in hindsight, we somehow should have built in some in perpetuity maintenance budget to that. But yeah, so this is an active thing that we keep thinking about. I'm glad people are raising it. Because I think that's maybe the next big nut to crack when we start thinking about this.
I mean, I immediately go back to any number of systems, including when we first started out, Brave New World of World Wide Web and web pages, and everybody was like, well, how much does it cost? And you kind of put it in there.
Yeah.
And it was, just a little bit after that, when we sort of say, well, but hold on, you can't put, the whole thing is, it has to be dynamic, it has to be interactive and updated. So we need someone to be in charge of the web, that sustainability on a budgetary staffing infrastructure sort of for the sustainable projects.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
Here we are again.
Yeah.
And I think part of the problem is that it's something I think we stumble upon, and it's 2020 hindsight, kind of think, oh, right. We probably should have made it clear don't build a fence around this particular space because XYZ reasons. But then it's also difficult to get funding for this, right? Like to the sustainability side of things. People like putting things in place and then building it. Yeah. We have a new guest here in the room. Building it, but not necessarily wanting to pay for but the boring ongoing sustainability.
Yeah, that's
less sexy than.
That's right. Even building, so go back to your web analogy. I mean, we started up when I first came to CNT. One of the first projects I had was called the Neighborhood Early Warning System, where I put together data on every property in Chicago, so people could look at that. And once we built it, we got good funding to do that. Yeah. Then we couldn't get it funded at all to keep it updated, and it was just a mess. And so, but now I think people in that realm know that you need to do all that and know that updating is important. So that's the future of green infrastructure in some ways, is to make sure, to Christine's point, I think, is to make sure when we build something, especially in public areas, or institutional land, that there is some ongoing maintenance.
And it's expanding to a new ring on that sort of education and advocacy work of educating policymakers and funders, private and public, like simply because you build it, the rain will come. That's good, but it's going to keep coming, and we need to think longer term. But I don't know that we always come at it that way. So I think part of our responsibility is to sort of educate folks.
And I'll give an example here that's sort of related to this. So the city of Chicago is known for our green roofs, right? We were one of the first municipalities to mandate that. And so we went, after about 10 years of being very progressive with our sustainable development policy, to look at those roofs, working with this is when I was in the city of Chicago with the planning department. And one of the takeaways, and this is to the fence example with Al Raby, is the ones that had public access were the best maintained. They looked the best, they're performing the best. Because a lot, if they were just mandated as an additional piece during construction, they were thrown up there and maybe maintained for a year or two, but then forgotten about.
Right.
Because the performance of them wasn't an important aspect of that. So keeping engagement, we love to say towards the private solutions, just mandate it.
Right.
And then, we put it on them. And I hear that from projects all the time, is that you just like, oh, the government just made them do it.
Right.
But that doesn't really carry on into the future. And specific to the topic, water doesn't know boundaries.
Right.
Doesn't know public, doesn't know private. So it's moving through shared governance structures all the time. And so, being really mindful of that, and whether, like to Gordon's question, whether it's carrying pollutants, whether it's, leading to flooding, whether it's leading to whatever issue, it doesn't know that it was governed one way on this side of the fence and one way on the other side.
One of the things I'll say on that sort of multi-layered, multi-boundary sort of thing, I appreciate the work that you've shared from CNT, is that like homeowners can go in and kind of have my 40 acres,
Yeah, right.
nowhere close, standard city lot, but my standard city lot, and I can kind of think about that, but then it kind of becomes sort of my region, and then like my neighborhood, but then where it fits into I love my wife grew up in that neck of the woods, the catchment basin in Palos Hills, Palos Park, right? Like you suddenly get the reason it's still, I've done all this work as an individual homeowner. Oh, now I get to see all the water for miles around, not just my 40 acres is flowing in here. And so then I've got to, kind of change that. So I appreciate that you're looking at multiple layers of the issue. So
Yeah, that's, and our partners up in Northwestern, that's her big thing, is to think about Kimberly Gray, by the way, she has a name. I don't know if you know her. Is that it's a network. It's a network solution. It's not one-off is great, but that's not going to solve that that catchment that I showed in Palos Hills, where all those different catchments will go into. So it's a network solution. And when you're thinking about, there's a place in Markham that we're really examining closely and going to implement some green infrastructure with Greenprint as part of the Leap High project. 294 and another one comes this way. It's just this isolated, and there is a ephemeral native prairie that's one of the few native prairies that's still left right at the bottom of all of that. And there's this little neighborhood called Bel Air in Markham that is just a sort of isolated flooding place because they never even built the sewer out. There's sewer drains, but they don't go anywhere. In fact, they go into this ephemeral wetland, and then when it floods, it just is circulating around. So why am I thinking about? But that's not we're not gonna solve that problem by, Mary and Joe and Steve putting rain gardens in. What we got to do is build a swale and a detention basin, sort of on the scale that I showed. Yeah. Yeah, it's just solve the bigger problem. And it was caused by some great infrastructure that was put in. These
or not.
Yeah, or not. Right. That's what when I talked about, you don't know why urban flooding happens all the time. It's several different things. I got a little far afield there.
Yeah, so I know we're at time, but even though for those loyal folks that are still with us, I just want to say, even though we're way at the far tip of that sewer shed that we live in here in Chicago, even though we're right next to the lake, right? We really are contributing to a sewer shed that goes all the way back over to Chicago River. You see all this green roof, you see all this permeable paving, you see all these rain gardens that are on this lakeshore campus, and the disconnection of a lot of our infrastructure from the city's sewer, because the water that falls on our campus floods the basement somewhere down that pipe as it heads from here towards the river. So that's why we're doing that piece, both because we want to do it, but also because we're required to through the stormwater management ordinance in the city of Chicago. But so there you go. When you walk across campus, you see that permeable paving and your heel gets stuck or whatever might happen. Just know it's for good. Read those signs and you'll learn more about our sustainability stuff.
And you're right, we are at time, but I mean, it's a good example too. Like we get focused like we're a green campus, and as if we're doing that because that's what's important for us and for our buildings. But the ripple effect, again, the water, the ripple effect is important to consider. Well, Peter, thank you so much.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Thanks for putting up with the chaos in here. Thank you all for putting up all the chaos over there, and thanks for joining us at another Friday morning seminar. Thanks for the co-sponsorship, and we'll see you all soon. Bye, everybody.